who are upsetting the peace of neighbourhoods. And I think that giving children as young as 10 this kind of notoriety in the press will only encourage the behaviour we're trying to stop. But what do the kids on Gipton think? They're the ones subject to all these new rules, curfews and ASBOs. How do you think it affects people to have your photograph on the front of the local newspaper?
With them being up front page of a paper, they'll think, yeah, we might be able to do this more often and get photographed again.
You really think that?
Yeah, I think.
On Gipton, the 9 p.m. curfew even applies to children at a sports centre and a football pitch, unless they're with a responsible adult. I think this is shocking, but even more astounding are the potential penalties for those who disobey, a £5,000 fine or 3 months locked up. If we think about the last 3 or 4 years when these antisocial behaviour powers have been used more intensively, do you think it's made the estate more peaceful or safe?
No, I think it's had the opposite effect. I think it antagonises these children to behave worse. 9 o'clock's far too early. We don't live in a police state, but it seems like we are continuously living in a police state. They're criminalising 100% of the kids on the estate. It's not teaching any respect for the police.
But young people in Gipton tell me that they're being stopped several times a week just for walking around. Had you been stopped by the police before?
Loads.
Loads.
Loads of times?
Yeah, even if you aren't even doing it, they'll stop you. We've had 15 stops in 1 week.
15 times?
In 1 week.
Just for walking down the street?
Just for walking down the street.
I'm seriously worried at what I've seen here. I know Gipton has problems with delinquency, but too many kids here feel harassed just for hanging about like typical teenagers. The boundaries between what is a crime, what is not a crime, are being blurred by the application of these indiscriminate global rules. There's confusion. And why are the police clamping down on teenagers? I believe it's because the Home Office has set targets for detecting crime. The problem is these targets are completely unrelated to the seriousness of the offence, so it's easier for officers to notch up points by tackling low-level crime. Many police officers are concerned about these targets, and one, from a big metropolitan force, has agreed to talk to me if we protect his identity.
If a young child is arrested for a minor offence of theft, where they've probably stolen a PlayStation game or a bar of chocolate, the police officer attending that now is no longer thinking in his head, well, I'll use my discretion here, and I'll speak to the store, advise them, I'll speak to this young child in front of their parents, and I think that will be the most appropriate action. The police officers now attending those incidents are seeing an easy target. They're seeing, well, I've got a detected crime here, I'm only on 1 this month. I probably need 3 or 4 this month in order to keep my performance up, so I'm going to use this opportunity to reach that detection.
Are there any financial implications to all of that?
Yes, there are. Officers on the streets have what's called a priority payment, which is payable in and around the Christmas period, or at the end of the financial year, depending on the force. These payments range from anything from £800 to £1,200, and if his detections are above the average, or at the level of what's required of an officer, he would get his bonus payment for that year.
So are you saying that officers will only get their annual bonus if they have so many sanctioned detections?
That is correct, yes.
So police officers could tackle difficult kids informally, but in some forces it might put their bonuses at risk. These financial incentives are encouraging the police to use their full powers and give the kids a criminal record. Now, if a youngster is charged with a 3rd offence after 2 formal warnings, they'll automatically go to court, no matter how trivial the crime. Here in West Yorkshire, the number of youngsters being dealt with in the criminal justice system has risen by over 60% in the past 4 years. A lot's changed since I left the bench 12 years ago. In the last 4 years, the number of sentences passed in youth courts has increased by around a quarter. The chief representative of over 8,000 youth court magistrates is John Fassenfelt, who sits in Kent.
It's not just my view, it's what other magistrates tell me. In England and Wales, we're getting too many youngsters into court for too many minor crimes. I saw a person in court the other day for stealing a small chocolate bar. I mean, the fight in the school playground, I never used to see up until 2 or 3 years ago.
Youngsters convicted by the court of even minor offences are usually supervised by youth offending teams.
What you have to do is you pick up one of these cards and you have to decide, since you've been in trouble, whether
All
it's
over the
more or
country,
less likely
people
to
like
happen.
Nicola are doing
So it might
fantastic
say
work to help them
something
improve their
Now,
behaviour.
since you've
But with
been in
more
trouble,
minor offences coming before the court,
more or
she's
less,
being
you're
overwhelmed.
more or less likely to get in trouble with them now that you've got a criminal record. From about a year ago, I'd say I've seen an increase in about a third of my caseload. So we're working with a third more young people, and I think it's mainly due to these lower end offenders which could have been dealt with in other ways. So some of the cases would be, say, criminal damage, minor assaults, and it means we're sort of having several sessions with them which we would normally be able to focus on more high-risk offenders, ones who are getting in more trouble and more likely to offend, and more risk to the public, really.
You might be surprised to know that once a child has been convicted of an offence, he or she automatically goes to court for every subsequent charge, no matter how trivial. If they're sentenced on 3 occasions and then arrested again within 3 years, they'll be categorised as a persistent young offender. Persistent young offender. A persistent young offender. The law doesn't generally allow us to identify a convicted youth, but a few agreed to talk to me anonymously about their experiences with the police since being labelled persistent young offenders. So how often are you getting stopped?
At least 3-4 times a day,
And how long's that gone on for?
a few months.
Are you serious? 3-4 times a day?
Yeah, every day.
And this is because, what, you are...
Persistent young offender, yeah.
And officers know that how?
They've got photos of us in the wallets.
You get arrested for things you haven't even done and that all the time, just get brought in, just for...
That you are notorious in this way, do you think it makes it more or less likely that you will re-offend?
More likely to offend again.
Why?
Because it just does your head in and it makes you angry that they're just not leaving you alone all the time.
I've heard stories of this happening across the country. Once labelled as persistent young offenders, youngsters are frequently pulled up by the police, even when there's no compelling evidence of fresh misbehaviour by them personally. Once labelled as... So how old are you?
11.
Do you get stopped at all?
I get stopped all the time. Every time a cop car sees me. Every time I walk around the corner, there's a cop car there, I get pulled. Walk around that corner, there's a cop car, I get pulled.
That's incredible.
It's annoying.
But you've been taken to the police station how often?
There's about at least 2 times a week.
At least twice a week?
Sometimes they lock me up for things you ain't done.
Has that happened just once?
Oh yeah, well they'll be locked me up a load of times for things you ain't done.
So they put you in a cell,
Yeah.
and you're in the cell by yourself? Can that be for several hours?
7 hours to 24 hours.
For 24
I've
hours?
been remanded over a weekend.
A whole weekend you were in a
Well,
police cell?
3 days, something.
I think that turning children as young as 11 into celebrity offenders by constantly harassing them so that it becomes their persona is tantamount to child abuse. By giving them a label which is constantly reinforced by the police makes law and order and policing into a sort of game for them. They're given a label which they then feel they have to live up to.
There are. I know of a case where a persistent young offender was arrested, and because he was supposedly at large for a period of time, there was a bonus payment paid to the officer. And those bonus payments can range from £50 to £250.
It seems to me that this system of targets and bonus payments is encouraging police officers to hound vulnerable young people into more crime rather than helping them to reform. So does all this expensive use of the full panoply of the criminal justice system make us safer? I don't think so. Throughout my life, I've been committed to reducing the number of children headed for adult criminal careers. The problem with the government's current police detection targets is that it's led the number of children labelled criminal to rocket. We have nearly 3,000 young people in custody, and we lock up about twice as many 12 to 17-year-olds as we did 15 years ago. But my experience is that putting delinquent kids inside all too often trains them to become adult criminals.
Nice to meet you.
And you, sir. And I'm very grateful to you. Jeff was charged with burglary and sentenced to 9 months in a young offenders institution.
So is this where you came to, Jeff?
Yeah, this is it.
Chelmsford Prison?
Yeah. I didn't expect...
Was planning on going to college, but he received a very different education instead.
I came out of prison with a criminal education, a totally brand new way of life. You learn how to break into cars, you learn how to detect undercover policemen, you learn how to sell drugs efficiently. And
since getting out, Jeff's managed to turn his life around, but it's not been easy for him. Now, I'm not an old softy. Some young people commit such serious offences that they have to be taken out of circulation for a while. But last year, the Youth Justice Board spent $280 million on custody, 70% of their budget. I don't think this is the most effective use of taxpayers' money.
Around 3/4 of all young offenders who get locked up will commit a further offence within 2 years of release. That's not an effective system, that's a system that's failing.
In deprived areas, it's well known that drug dealing is rife within the areas. More serious crime is occurring, and there are persons and intelligence there to suggest that persons who are involved in this crime have access to firearms, and no action is being taken on those areas where it should be taken.
And is that because in order to detect and to follow up intelligence for example, firearms offences, it would require quite a serious investment of police resources but not generate many numbers for the targets?
That is correct.
It's the government's proud boast that we're really tackling the crime problem because so many more offences are being brought to justice. What I think many people will find startling is a police officer suggesting that this might not be the case, that we're not tackling some really serious offences like gun crime, whilst we're making up the numbers by bringing more and more minor offenders, children and young people into the criminal justice system.
When at the Youth Justice Board, I discovered police forces with very different ways of working and different results. In South Wales, the number of youngsters ending up in the criminal justice system has actually fallen. Is this because they're behaving better, or because minor misbehaviour isn't being labelled criminal? Because they're behaving better, or because minor misbehaviour isn't being labelled criminal? Is this because they're behaving better, or because minor misbehaviour isn't being labelled criminal? I went to meet the Chief Constable of South Wales, Barbara Wilding.
Well, I take the philosophy and everything that we're doing around young people is if young people get into the criminal justice system, that's a failure. It's a failure on everyone. It's a failure on the partnerships. And my philosophy is early intervention and stop the behaviour before you get to the point where they're having to go along this route that actually can go very, very quickly and suddenly they're in the criminal justice system.
Now, when you're challenged, as I assume you are from time
Indeed.
to time about this policy...
Well, I have been challenged before the Welsh Affairs Committee in summons to the House of Commons. Local MPs have, at public meetings, told me I was letting down the citizens of particular areas because we had hardly any ASBOs. Local councillors who saw what was being written in the media about how behaviour, X number of ASBOs was seen to be the target that one should all achieve for. Mine has been to say, I think you're wrong.
But I mean, are you able to
statistics.
point to crime statistics?
Yes, I am. And I'm able to say that young people's involvement in crime is dropping in South Wales. I'm able to say that young people's involvement in crime is dropping in South Wales.
In Swansea, youth crime has halved in 5 years. The youth court that sometimes sat 7 sessions a week now rarely does more than 4.
So this afternoon we're going to go up to Town Hill to call on one of the youngsters that's come to our attention. So.
Phil Bowen is a former head teacher and works for Swansea's youth offending team, making home visits.
Should be quite quick.
Here, with the support of the police, they concentrate resources on trying to change children's problem behaviour at an early stage, usually before they get embroiled in the criminal justice system.
It could range from support for the parent, from a parent mentoring scheme, it could be support for the family, or it might be down to individual schemes, sport, fishing, something like that. At the moment, I've done about 350 visits. And out of those 350 visits, there's still under 10 young people that have breached the personal warning.
That's an extraordinarily good record.
Yeah.
In the case of Sam, who we're going to see, I mean, how much of a problem was there with
Sam
him?
was a real problem on the estate. It got to such a point that his mother was quite embarrassed to go into the shops because the shopkeepers would be having a go about his behaviour when he was in there.
Phil draws up a contract with the youth not to get in trouble again over the next 6 months. This contract is outside any criminal proceedings and is voluntary.
So I'm here and I'm really pleased to tell you that I haven't had any more incidents in since last August. So we've only got a few months to go now and you'll be off this personal warning and have a clean record. So well done. What sort of things have you been doing?
I signed up for a motorbike course.
Right.
Trying to get on fishing schemes.
Right.
Just keeping out the trouble.
And you're 16 next month?
Yep.
So you're going to start looking for work then, you said?
Yeah.
OK, and we'll be able to continue to work with you and help you get that work sorted out.
So what do you think might have happened if you hadn't had the support from Phil that you've had?
I'd just be sitting waiting for the police to knock on the door or phone to say he's done this or done this.
Right.
I could say the same things as Phil, but he wouldn't take any notice of me, but he would of him.
So do you think things are going quite well now?
Things are going really well. Sam hasn't been in trouble for months. He apologised to all the shopkeepers who he'd upset, so that has helped tremendously for both of us.
The South Wales approach of early intervention has reduced real crime. Here's an example. Swansea was once a hotspot for youth car crime. No longer. Barbara Wilding argues this is because she's more able to ignore politically imposed targets than her fellow chief constables.
For me, I'm very pleased to say, it's not a problem as it is for some of my colleagues who are more newly in post, because they are automatically on a bonus scheme. And, of course, one of the things that their bonuses could be predicted upon is how they achieve against the targets which are centrally driven.
During the course of making this programme, I've learnt about and been shocked by something I didn't appreciate. I knew the importance of the police detection targets. What I hadn't realised was the degree to which they're backed up by financial incentives. I think that dangling fat cheques in front of officers, incentivising them to arrest children and young people for relatively minor offences is immoral. Is immoral. Is immoral.
On The Insider next Friday at 7:30, whether in school or in the workplace, one woman's plan to beat the bullies. And coming up, Unstoppable Dawn and her musician partner Rocco had their hearts set on buying a place in Spain. What happens next is Caustic Chaos.